Perfect. Morning, everybody. I'm Stephanie Cavino, the director of the Blackstone Watershed Collaborative. And if you want to introduce yourself today, you can tell us name and affiliation, and do you or have you ever lived in a floodplain? I have rented in a floodplain before, but I was very careful when I purchased that I did not want to live in a floodplain. Kaylee, how about you?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kaylee McLaren. I'm the restoration manager at the Blackstone Watershed Collaborative. I don't think I've lived in a floodplain. I was just looking at the map now, and I don't think I have.
Nice, thanks. Greg.
Greg Dorschler, volunteer with the Greater Worcester Land Trust, and I do not and have not lived in a floodplain. However, during very heavy rains, we do have localized street flooding in the neighborhood here.
Yeah, good reminder, and I'm sure the guys will get into that. Floodplains do not always mean this is where it will flood, right? It floods in other locations. David.
I'm David Tefska, Uxbridge Board of Health, and involved in 2 MVP projects. Yes, I have lived in a floodplain in Indiana. The mighty White River goes right down through Indianapolis, and it floods regularly.
Thanks, David. Olivia.
Hello, I'm Olivia Hood. I'm the community stewardship coordinator with the Greater Worcester Land Trust, and I don't think I've ever lived in a floodplain. I've lived near a floodplain, but never within a floodplain.
Thanks. Peter.
Yes, Peter Coffin with Blackstone River Coalition, Blackstone Headwaters Coalition, Mendon Concom. As a grad student at UMass, I lived on the mighty Connecticut on a cheap house on posts. Fixed up a house in Upton. The land is in the floodplain, but the house is not, thank goodness. So insurance, yeah, big savings.
Yeah, structure is what matters to them. We'll talk about that. Thanks. Danny.
Hi, Danny Marini King with the Central Massachusetts Regional Planning Commission, or CMRPC, a little bit easier to say. Same situation. I don't live in a floodplain, or my house isn't in a floodplain, but some of the land is.
Great, thanks. Kate.
Folks, I'm Kate McPherson, Save the Bays Narragansett Bay Riverkeeper. I have never lived in a floodplain, and I am fortunate to live in a place that has very dry and sandy soils, so I don't ever get stormwater flooding either. But that was a careful consideration on mostly my part. So
Thanks. Yeah. Aaliyah.
Good morning. I'm Aaliyah Casso. I'm the conservation agent in Shrewsbury. I also was going through every single one of my addresses to see if I lived in a floodplain, and apparently I have not, but it does feel like I've come pretty close sometimes.
I love that everybody knows where the mapper is and to check it out. So it's a great start here. Nick.
Hi, everyone. This is Nick Cohen. I'm an environmental planner at the Horsley Witten Group. I also was checking the mapper and never lived in a floodplain, but I would bet if it wasn't for the Charles River Dam, there's probably a couple places in the Boston area that I would have been in the floodplain if not for that dam.
Yeah, sometimes they do good things. Dams. Ted.
Hi, Ted Beauvais with the Blackstone River Watershed Association. And I have, as a renter, lived in 2 locations in Colorado. One was in Gunnison, Colorado, and it was right near the Gunnison River. I wasn't flooded while I was there, but there was very little elevation difference between the river and the house. And then another one was over in Buena Vista, Colorado. It was right adjacent to a relatively small creek, but if the water came up, the house would have been flooded.
Yeah, small waterways can make big floods for sure. Judy.
Good morning, everybody. Judy Rondo. I'm the non-point source outreach coordinator with the non-point source management section in the watershed planning program at Mass DEP, that long title. I actually live just outside of a floodplain in sunny Thompson, Connecticut. So
thanks. Dan?
Dan Giza, fishery biologist with Fernandez Flow Labs and Tatnick Brook Watershed Association member. I have not lived in a floodplain, thankfully.
Nice, thanks. Heidi.
Good morning, everyone. So I do not live in a floodplain currently, and like Stephanie, I was careful when purchasing a home to make sure that I was well away from that or other hazards. As a child, I did live in a coastal floodplain. We had a house right on the Jersey Shore, and actually that house was we didn't own it anymore, but it was destroyed in Hurricane Sandy.
Yeah. Thanks. Sarah?
Good morning. I'm Sarah. I use she, her pronouns. Mass Audubon, based out of Broadman, Brook, and Worcester. And I don't know if I've ever lived in a floodplain. I've lived in a lot of different places, and I was kind of like Googling just now to figure out, but not to my knowledge, no.
Thanks. And then I'm going to hand it to our speakers. So Katie, Nadia, and Morgan, if you'd like to introduce yourselves.
Go ahead. I'm Nadia Madden. I'm a floodplain management specialist at Mass DCR. And I grew up not in a floodplain, but in a house that flooded every spring, just due to bad drainage situations in the town. And then I have definitely lived in floodplain elsewhere. I think most recently I up in Newmarket, New Hampshire on the Lamprey River.
And I'm Katie Pate, also with Mass DCR in the Flood Hazard Management Program. I'm not directly speaking today. I'm just kind of hanging out in the background, just being that kind of eyes in the back. But I do not currently live in a floodplain, but I did for a year in college rent a house that was in the floodplain. I did not know it then. Luckily for that 12 months I was there, it was not an issue. But now that, knowing what I know, I probably would not have done that, except for the price was right. And when you're in college, I guess that's an important factor. But yeah, I was always lucky nothing happened in that 12 months I was there.
Hi, everyone. Morgan Riley, Rhode Island Emergency Management Agency, State Floodplain Coordinator. No, I have never and don't ever plan to live in a floodplain. So.
Well, from here, I'll stop sharing my screen. And if you guys want to share your presentation, you're welcome to. Did I miss anybody in introductions otherwise? Okay. Great. Thank you so much for coming today.
All right, let's see. Go ahead and put this in presentation mode. I can, let's see. Oh. Hold on. Is that? I'm not quite sure if that's, sorry. Presentation mode, there we go. All right, can everyone see now? Great. So I guess we introduced ourselves a little bit. We're going to give a bit of Morgan and I are going to give a bit of an update on the Blackstone, the watershed map update from FEMA. So this is a little bit more of an introduction. We are both the state coordinating offices for the National Flood Insurance Program. So Morgan is the coordinator for all Rhode Island, and both Katie and I work for the state coordinator for Massachusetts. I don't know, Morgan, do you want to give any more of an introduction on what we do in the program?
Yeah, I mean, essentially we are kind of like the go-between between the local communities or the counties. I guess we don't have that in Rhode Island and FEMA. So we try to assist the communities with anything that has to do with floodplain management or any sort of like grant opportunities. And we're kind of like their first point of contact. We do a lot of outreach and also, try to keep everyone up to date on all the regulations and stuff like that. So that's like super, super, super high level. And I'm going to try to not say high level a ton today because I know that's like a really annoying word for people to hear. But it really is just kind of like a high level overview of what we do.
Yeah. That's a great overview. Just one thing I'm going to note is our offices, we are technical assistance programs. We don't have any regulatory authority. That authority really comes from FEMA and from all the communities who participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. But we do help a lot because there's a lot of technical information associated with being in the program. And one big thing that we help with, and we'll be helping the whole Blackstone watershed with, is the updating the new FEMA flood maps that I think everyone has preliminary maps at this point, and you're depending on where you are in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, you're in various states of adoption. So I was just gonna show a quick picture. Let's maybe just have a show of hands. Who here is familiar with FEMA flood insurance rate maps? You just raise your hand if you're familiar. Okay, so we've got like a good bit of familiarity from folks. Does anyone want to say or put in the chat like what you use the maps for?
So I'll go. This is Kate McPherson. Oh, my hand
Sure,
is up.
go ahead.
Let me lower that. And I used to be a freshwater wetlands permitting biologist, and I would use these maps all the time to determine whether or not, you know, permits were needed for floodplain, because floodplain is regulated as a wetland in Rhode Island.
Cool. Anything else people use the maps for?
Yeah, I can speak. I used to be the wetlands enforcement officer in the town of Thompson, sorry, and used to look at FEMA maps as well when we were evaluating permit applications.
Okay. And another question I wanted to ask, is there anything that people find hard to read or confusing about the FEMA flood insurance rate maps? And I don't know if anyone wants to comment on it.
David, I
Yeah,
see your
I've used it for looking at through our MVP project for looking at areas that are susceptible, residential areas that are susceptible to flooding. It's part of our map system for the assessors also. So I frequently visit them just to get an idea, especially if the Board of Health is looking at a property for one specific reason or for another. Yes, I do find them confusing. Uh, the legends that overlay sometimes are hard to parse out.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that people definitely can have challenges with that. So I did want to let you know, my colleague Katie Pate is here. She's going to be running a virtual training on understanding FEMA's flood maps and other products. That's going to be next Wednesday, April 23rd from noon to 1:30. And Katie, I think you can maybe put some information on sign up in the chat. New registration is closed, but I didn't know if you wanted to give people a link or have them email you. But you can do that if that would be helpful. Okay, so the FEMA mapping process itself is kind of a long process. It's generally expected to be about 5 years, and as you can see, there's sort of some different stages in the process. You start with discovery, where FEMA goes out, talks to communities to discover information. They spend quite a bit of time on analysis and mapping. Then they eventually have preliminary flood map releases, and I think all of the Blackstone watershed at this point has a preliminary map. And then the last stage is finally the things you have to do to actually adopt the maps. There is a really great overview of this process that I'm going to try to pop in the chat maybe a little later, because hold on, let's see if I can do that now. But that's something that FEMA Region 1 put together that you can go through maybe at a later time, but it's a pretty good overview of how this mapping process works. And it's expected to be around 5 years, but I think it's been a little bit longer in the Blackstone. I was actually trying to look at the dates, and the first discovery meetings, I think with FEMA, started in 2017, maybe. And so we're just now getting towards the finish line, so it can take a while. And there's a lot of steps in the process that we're going to walk through here. So first of all, I think what you probably would like to see is the actual maps that you have. So this is the mapping status for the Blackstone watershed. As you can see, mostly we're in stage 3 and 4. So everyone in Worcester County, the Blackstone, you should have preliminary maps. These got released a little earlier, I think late last year. And then in Rhode Island, Morgan, you guys are a little further along. Is that right? So, and we'll go into some more detail, but so
Yeah,
just,
yeah, you're
you're
right. And I do want to confirm it was 2017 when this all started, when the first discovery meetings happened. So
yeah. So it can take some time. So what they do during discovery is typically, you know, FEMA will take some time. They'll come out and meet with local officials. They'll use the data they have, and they'll start trying to set study priorities for where they want to, you know, do new studies, where they want to improve the studies they already have. And they'll have some meetings with local communities and other stakeholders to present these priorities and get feedback. Once they've completed that stage, then FEMA has to sort of bring that up to national, and they finalize their priorities for what they're actually going to do based on what the need is and also where the funding is available. So if I have anything else there. So the first discovery meetings were in 2017 in Rhode Island. I think Massachusetts had some in 2018. After discovery, they go to the next stage. And this is, they actually decide, okay, there's some places where we're going to do new detailed studies. And here's where they decided to do them on the Blackstone. And this could include like going out and doing new surveys. It definitely means a full engineering analysis, this hydrology and hydraulic study that they do. And they did it, you know, on a 17-mile stretch of the Blackstone River. You can see down here, they did it also along the Middle River, up here in Worcester for just a couple miles. The Mill River, there's a 17.2-mile stretch on the Mill River, and the Quinsigamond also did a new detailed study there. And then for the rest of the watershed, they didn't quite do nothing. They sort of already had done detailed studies in certain areas where you already had an elevation available. And for these, what they did was they redelineated that study. So they took that older study with those base flood elevations, and they have much better topographic data for their maps. So they redelineated those studies. So they will have the same water elevation height for that base flood, but it will be, the area might be a little different, the floodplain area. And then for everything else, these unmapped A zones, does everyone know what an unmapped A zone is? Does anyone raise their hands if they don't know what that is? Or so A zone is like when they don't have the base flood elevation, it's just an approximation. So they use the most basic kinds of engineering for this. And they say, well, we know that there is a flood zone here, but we don't know what the elevation is. If you were going to build here, you actually have to go and figure that out. And maybe the community has to figure it out. Maybe the developer is going to be required to go and do a study to figure that out. So those now have been, they used to have other approximate methods, but now they kind of use an automated digital modeling process with some data that they have. And so those are definitely different. You know, they still don't have a base flood elevation that they give you, but the areas are different. They are much, when you look at them on the maps, you'll see that they much more closely hug whatever water feature you would expect them to follow. And I think they are a big improvement, but it is a change. There's new A zones in certain areas in the Blackstone as well. So any questions here? Okay. All right. And then I think the next thing let you know is for mapping. So they've been working on this mapping process. They had done this for a couple of years. At some point, they came up with their first set of draft maps. This was back in 2022. This is even before they have preliminary maps. They sort of make these draft maps. And once they complete those, they will meet again. They have these work map meetings. They call them the flood risk review meeting. And these typically also happen. They invite the head of the community, and sometimes they bring it down to the appropriate planning and land use officials. Sometimes they don't. And they give people an opportunity to actually review and provide early feedback on these maps. And so they do encourage input at that point. They want to see, you know, does these maps really pass the straight face test? You know, obviously these only go out to the officials. They're not really ready for prime time consumption yet. And then if there are any big changes, those get discussed as well. And, you know, so in terms of, okay, here's what happened with the modeling that's different. And then if there's any tweaks that need to happen, you know, if they get feedback from the communities, typically it would be like, okay, something like there was, you know, we had some more information to give you that you didn't put in, something like that. Or, you know, you've got these street names or this river name wrong. Those will get tweaked as well. And then after that, you get to the preliminary part of the process. And Morgan, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Nadia. And obviously you can control the slides, right?
Yeah, I can just comment to
Great. Okay, so yeah, after that whole mapping process, then we have our preliminary products, and these you can find on the FEMA Map Service Center, not the National Flood Hazard Layer viewer. If you Google FEMA Map Service Center, it'll come right up, or you can go to that website. But essentially, this is where we're about 6, maybe 9 months after our flood risk review meeting. And this is kind of when we can look at the new maps, review them. Our local officials can discuss these with their constituents or residents if they so please. This is also when the public's going to get that notification saying, hey, your preliminary maps are out. Go ahead and view them. And so then we have our CCO meeting, which is our community coordination and outreach meeting. And this typically is, after the preliminary maps are issued, and that's when we start our appeal period. So the appeal period is essentially when anyone can go and submit comments directly to FEMA for 90 days. And this is kind of, this is why we're calling them the preliminary maps. So FEMA will come and they'll hold a meeting with the community officials. That happens, the CCO meeting. And then the FEMA will go over with the community officials kind of any big changes that have occurred that they're going to see on those maps. And then, give them the 90 days to provide feedback. And obviously the appeals is a public notification. Public, will go to the, say the library or something, and we'll go over the maps, and that, kind of gives everyone an opportunity. A lot of times that notice will be put in like a local newspaper or a newsletter saying that, we do have these new maps, please go review them. If you think that there's anything incorrect, this is your opportunity to, provide comments and feedback. Next slide, please.
Yep. Just in terms of phases, I think Rhode Island's already done with its appeals process. Is that right, Morgan? And it has not started yet in Massachusetts.
Correct. Yeah, we're a little bit ahead. So then after our 90-day appeal process, this is when FEMA takes those comments, they go back, they, kind of fix what needed to be fixed, and then they'll issue a letter of final determination, or an LFD. You're going to probably hear that more throughout this presentation. So it's also known as an LFD, and that is sent to the community CEOs. So whether that be your town manager, your town council president, your mayor, what have you, and that is basically saying that your new maps are going to go effective exactly 6 months from when the LFD was sent. So then that gives the communities 6 months to adopt the maps, update their ordinances, and get everything kind of in line. Typically, when you update your ordinance, you'll have to update the map panel numbers and the effective date of those maps, which would have been 6 months after the LFD. So right now, and I'll talk about this some more, but 2 of our 3 counties are currently in that LFD status. So we are awaiting that letter from FEMA to kind of move forward with that. So FEMA will hold a public open house and will present the new maps to the general public. Anyone can attend, and they can kind of use that information to determine, maybe we weren't in a flood zone, and now with the new maps, we're getting mapped into a flood zone. So it's kind of the residents' opportunity to go look at these new maps and kind of determine, do we need to really pay attention to this? Is this something that doesn't really affect us? And things like that. So once the new maps and the FIS, the flood insurance study, go effective, you'll be able to find those on the map service center. And then also in the map service center, once we have those new maps, you can also go in and find the old maps under historic products. So that's also something that's been very helpful, especially with trying to figure out, what the key differences are. So you can always find the older maps on the map service center as well. Great.
Next slide.
Next slide, please. Yes. So yeah, this is our current status. As you can see, Bristol County and Providence County, we are expecting that letter from FEMA later this year. FEMA is currently working on another mapping study right now. So once they're finished with that one, they'll move on to ours. Worcester County is a little bit farther behind. There were some changes that had to be made to those maps. So the letter of final determination is expected potentially, January of 2027. So Bristol and Providence, hopefully at some point, before the end of the year, and Worcester will be a little bit farther behind. Next, please. So in general, these are just some good things to kind of remember. So, if it's, happening to you or people are asking you questions about this, when the maps change, of course, structures can be added or removed from the floodplain. We see it both ways. And I believe you're going to be sent this, but we do have kind of a list of resources that we can send out that kind of have links to more information about this. But next slide, please. So because this map update is for the Blackstone River watershed, we obviously are not going into a V zone, but if you are in an A zone, you're in that special flood hazard area, the A or the AE. And with the new maps, you're actually in a moderate or low risk zone. So say you're in the A zone and you get your new maps, and good for you, you're in the X zone now. That is something that's going to make your insurance rates a lot more affordable. Insurance technically would only be optional now, since you're not technically considered to be in that special flood hazard area, but a lender obviously has the right to require insurance anyways. And we have been seeing that more and more, but it's still obviously highly recommended. Your risk is reduced, not completely removed. And this is actually where 40% of the disaster assistance and insurance claims come from, is from outside of that special flood hazard area. So that's always something I like to throw in there, just because, it's not something that we normally would assume, but always just a good idea if you were in the flood zone and you're mapped out, because it'll be so much less expensive, ideally. It's a good idea to just keep that insurance.
I have a quick question. You said because it's the Blackstone River, obviously there's no, I wasn't sure if you said B or V zone. Can you clarify that? I don't know what those zones are.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. So the V zone, so if you see on this slide, it says high risk zones A and V. So A and V are the zones that are in our special flood hazard area. Zone V is a velocity zone. That's our coastal area with wave action. So because the Blackstone watershed isn't on the coast anywhere, that's why I'm so sorry. I should have clarified
that's
that.
Fine. Thanks for explaining it.
Yeah, no problem. And then the AE or the A is, our riverine or our, farther away from the coast zones.
And what about B and C?
So those are from older maps. So some communities still do have older maps. If they're on paper maps, they might still be seeing B or C on the legend. But with the newer, more updated maps, you're really going to see an X, which is either shaded or unshaded. So the shaded X zone is what we call the 0.2% annual chance zone, or the 500-year floodplain. And then the unshaded X zone is kind of like our blue sky, sunny day. You won't see anything on the map relating to that. Alrighty. Okay, so the opposite of what we were just talking about. If you're outside of the zone, if you're in an X zone, meaning you are not in the special flood hazard area, and with the new map update, you are going to be mapped into a flood zone, in an A zone or a V zone if you're in that riverine area or the coastal area. This is what FEMA calls a newly mapped procedure. So now flood insurance is going to be required. If your lender requires it, that would be up to them essentially. But the newly mapped procedure is a discount for newly mapped in buildings. So your premiums will increase gradually until you reach your full risk premium. And you have 12 months to get your flood insurance after that update. So the other thing with that is it can be transferred to a new owner, that original policy. So if you are newly mapped into a flood zone and you're either already considering moving or you want to sell your house, say you don't really want to live in a house that's in a flood zone and you want to sell your house, but you still had to purchase that policy, that can be transferred to the new owner, and that's for the newly mapped procedure. So again, this is pulled right from the flood insurance policy handbook. But we have our B and our C and our D zones. Likely you will only see X zones, at least for Rhode Island. We don't have B, C, or D anymore. But if you do have an older map, it could potentially be on that legend. But essentially, those are all of our low risk zones. And then our A and our V are the zones that are considered to be in the special flood hazard area. Are there any questions about the newly mapped procedure or anything about like changing zones or anything, general questions about flood zones? And yes, same, I'll second that comment from Nadia. Definitely go take Katie's course on FEMA flood maps. It would be super beneficial and super helpful, especially if you're going from not in a flood zone to a flood zone.
So we've got a few folks with their hands up. I don't know if you have more slides and this is just a break for a second or.
Nope, this is our last.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So Sarah, if you want to ask your question.
Thank you. And yeah, apologies. This is my first exposure to FEMA flood map. And so apologies if my question feels like redundant. I'm looking on like a map for Worcester where I live, and I'm seeing like zones labeled AE. What does that mean?
Yeah, so the AE zone, so essentially when you in our special flood hazard area, we have our A zone and our V zone. So our A zone is typically riverine or farther away from the coast, and our V zone, meaning velocity, is our coastal zone with wave action. The E just means that there is a BFE, a base flood elevation, associated with that. So if you see an E, an AE number, that number is your BFE, that's your base flood elevation. So when Nadia was talking earlier about the unnumbered A zones, you'll see it just as an A with nothing else. There won't be an E, there won't be a number. So an AE just means that there's an elevation that's been determined there. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. So it's a high risk and then it's associated with like a specific.
Yeah, so a good way to just remember it is like if there's an E, it means there's an elevation there. So you'll see a number like how you see on the map right here. There's a number associated with that. So this is one of our it's not a unnumbered A zone. It actually has a BFE associated with it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Peter, go ahead.
Yes, Stephanie, thanks. It seems like the updates, there could be a couple of changes. One is with greater rain events, the 1% storm grows. So I would assume the floodplain would grow. The other would be as more development and imperviousness goes on in the floodplain, would that also raise it? And then a final question is, are any of them getting reduced? I would think that everything would be expanded. So can you answer any of that?
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily. We can't assume anything when it comes to mapping and data, when it especially when it comes to this kind of stuff. We do see frequently that some floodplains are actually decreasing in size, either due to any construction. We have a lot of dam removals, culvert work, and that can all affect a floodplain upstream and downstream. So I wouldn't say we can assume that everything is, things are going to only increase, because we do see that they do decrease, not as frequently as they are increasing, but it definitely is still happening.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to speak to that, Nadia.
Sure. Well, Katie and I and sort of our department, in preparation for this meeting, we did take a closer look at the new maps and the map changes for the Blackstone River. I know, Stephanie, we're hoping maybe USGS, who is actually the mapping contractor for FEMA, that they might be able to join to speak a little bit more to this. But it's actually surprising. There are not a lot of places where there are increases, other than that there are some new, because of the new automated mapping, there are some new zones that used to be in the 500-year floodplain that are now in the 100-year, the 1% floodplain. So there are some areas, but there are a lot of areas where actually the on a marginal way where the floodplain has shrunk a little bit, and that's because there is much better topographic mapping for these new maps than there was back in 2011, 2012, 2009 when these when the Blackstone maps were originally created. So because of the improvements in data, that has actually, I think, I didn't see anything really dramatic for the Blackstone, but there are some places where there's change. So, and we can share, FEMA, again, has some tools, and maybe it might be, if you don't know how to really read the maps well, I really recommend Katie's course, but FEMA has some different map change viewers where you can look at the difference between the preliminary maps and the current maps which you have, and see where the differences are. But it looked like, I don't know, Katie, you can maybe chime in as well, but I didn't see a lot of big changes for the Blackstone.
No, there were some areas where the base flood elevation was obviously changing because of those studies being done. But I think, as Nadia said, just because of that updated topographic data, if anything, just the boundaries were slightly changing, which can affect properties, who's in, who's out. But there weren't too many areas where you're like, holy cow, look at this huge new floodplain area, at least where we were looking in Massachusetts. We did not look at the Rhode Island maps.
Yeah, I mean, it would pretty much be the same. And Nadia, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, the flood map change viewer, is that public facing?
So it is not the easiest to navigate if you're not really well versed in FEMA's maps.
But realistically, we could share that with the group.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you,
And Katie just did.
Yeah.
And maybe Katie will even take you through in her training how to use that viewer, because it's not the perfect one. I have seen, so we have been working with the rest of Massachusetts, because there's a lot of new maps going in. There are other parts of Massachusetts where the modeling is definitely increasing the floodplain, but I was kind of surprised that there's some variance in Blackstone, but it wasn't as big as I thought it would be. It wasn't just a straight increase.
Well, thank you for that, but because I can see there wouldn't be much changes maybe from the land use or culvert changes or dams, but the big driver I would think would be the 1% flood, and there's been a lot of science to say there's more rainfall, or the 1% storm happens more frequently. So wouldn't that affect the flooding?
I think there are, because of how the FEMA legislation is, there's not a consideration of future climate conditions in the maps at all. It's only based on USGS gauge data and other kinds of data on actual precip. So, for example, the big, I don't know how the 2023 storms impacted the Blackstone. I know that was pretty impactful up in Leominster and further north, but those storms, because that mapping process started earlier, those heavy storms were not included. So again, this is like, we can maybe connect you with the USGS mapping contract, because I think this is getting beyond how it was actually done, is beyond what we cover in our program.
And just to say that Worcester has a lot of information specific to the city, if you're interested in that. So they have their own little map viewer that they made, which is pretty easy to use. It's a nice just toggle format. And you can see that a lot of it is just additional information. There are some, like this is an expansion in Green Island, for instance, but then there are other places that have come out. So orange is that 500 year, not the regulated 100. So they also have a lot of information on their website here. So there's some links to presentations that they've made, and they talk about the different types of map changes. And I would definitely encourage you to check this out if you're in Worcester and interested in that. David?
Yeah, I think the question was answered, I think, just now. I mean, I was wondering how the whole process does compensate or recognize climate change. Yeah, okay, you're shaking your head. Yeah, that answers the question. And Peter's thought about, increasing through development, increasing impermeable surfaces, I think is very relevant to localized flooding at least. And I guess, I mean, what you're doing is monumental task. And I think throwing climate change into it probably be, more than can be humanly accomplished. But anyway, that answers my question. Thank you.
Yeah. And I just want to jump in just really quickly. The other thing to remember about these maps are they are flood insurance rate maps. They are for insurance purposes. They are not, we have plenty of other, sea level rise viewers and future conditions and things like that. These are primarily for flood insurance purposes. So I always try to, just throw that in there because we do, we start to spiral and we're like, how come these aren't like, what we want them to look like? And we have to remember that they're just for flood insurance purposes. So
right, but the insurance is supposedly against future events. So it's and the only stuff you've got to look at is the history, and that's fine as long as it's understood, I think. And so yeah, right. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm gonna put a quick plug in for another tool we have in Massachusetts. That's the Resilient Mass Climate Map. And they do, at least they don't have mapped out. I think in the future, we have some folks in the Office of Climate Science who are working on looking at what that future precip looks like when it actually gets down on the ground and goes into rivers and floods. But right now you can at least look at like what precipitation, what heavy storms are going to look like in the future. All the way out, I think till 2070. Is that right, Hillary? No.
Hi. Not sure.
But we do have future information in Massachusetts, but fully integrating those into floodplain inundation maps across the state is not something we have at this point.
Right. And that is something that we're not going to totally get to, but we're going to be looking at some of the riverine, very specific to the Blackstone flooding events, and also drought during our grant when we're getting all this funding to look at NIFWF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. We're going to look at an H&H for the river. So I'll probably make a separate meeting with both of you to chat more about some of those specifics of numbers to use. We're a little behind time here, so I'm going to give the last question to Heidi.
Oh, thanks so much. Thanks for all this great information. And Nadia, thank you for mentioning, what the state's doing. I think that's going to be even more important going down the road, because the states can step up and kind of do that forward-looking information and tools that doesn't seem the federal government's going to do now. I was very disappointed to hear that the Northeast Coastal Erosion Mapper was taken down and just no notification or anything. It just disappeared. So that's too bad. But thank you for all you're doing.
I think somebody might have that information. I feel like I've seen a link. I'm gonna see if I can find it. But that coastal erosion data is still available from a non-governmental link at this point.
That'd be great if you can share that link, because I was searching and couldn't find it. I know that there are a lot of like universities and private organizations that are trying to save the data from tools that have been taken down and then like recreate mapping tools and things like that. There are a lot of folks out there who are trying to make sure this information is still available since it was developed with public funds.
Well, thank you all so much. And we have your contact information. So if folks have more questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we can send those on. You're welcome to send them to me, but you can also just reach out to Morgan, Katie, or Nadia, and get your questions answered. They are a wealth of information. I feel like every time I talk to you guys, I'm learning something new. So thank you so much for coming today. So I want to run through some additional updates from the collaborative and what's going on in the watershed. Just one note that if you feel like we haven't been around as much, we've been doing a lot of grant assistance work in the background, and Kaylee's been out in the field 3 or 4 days every week doing culvert assessments for the towns of Grafton and Upton. So she's gotten 8 more people certified in the past few weeks. Here are 6 of them. And these are folks from municipalities, from nonprofits, from consulting agencies, all sorts of different groups. So thank you, Kaylee, for for doing that and spreading the word about culverts. We need more people certified in this work, so it's not all on the watershed groups.
Yeah, so if you sent me an email and I didn't get back to you, that's why, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. So yeah, thanks for your patience too.
Thank you. So this is a reminder about that floodplain course. So just plugging that again, it's going to be great. Learn more. There's so much to learn about floodplains. They're so complicated, but it's great to try and educate yourself. For academic partnership updates, Kaylee, do you want to take this?
Sure, yeah. So I've been working with a student named Claire from Clark University. She's doing her master's, and she is interested in the Morley Field project. So the environmental justice issue, they want to pave over this existing green space. And one of our partners, Bryce Dubois, he's a professor at University of New Haven. He's also a very active resident in the Pawtucket area. He's been keeping us posted on this and said that GIS services would be great to bolster their argument that Morley Field is a really valuable green space. So right now, Claire's doing a network analysis of walking routes in Pawtucket and how they would change if Morley Field does go away in the future. So yeah, we're working on that. We're trying to get her funding for this summer so she can keep working on this project. And yeah, when we have deliverables and updates, we will share that with you all.
Thanks, Kaylee. We're also working with Bryce, a student, Marie, at the University of New Haven, to look at the benefits of fish passage on the Blackstone River. So from RIDEM, we have a lot of the ecological benefits, but we don't necessarily have the economic and cultural. So Marie's just started looking at this, and a lot of this information is sort of a background of what she's learned from us and the resources we've given her. So it's not necessarily a lot of new information, but she started looking specifically at these 3 different case studies and what some of those benefits are. So not only what are the benefits, but how did they determine to those benefits, especially cultural benefits? That's really challenging to sort of qualify or quantify. So we're really excited to be working with her, and she'll be sharing some more information at the Fish Passage event, or the fish parade that we have coming up in a couple of weeks. So stay tuned for more there. Does anyone have updates about the bikeway or greenway? One day we will. One day we're going to be like, hey, there's this bike summit coming, but we're not there yet. For fish passage updates, one is that, just a reminder, we have these 3 current applications. So we submitted the last one. DEM just submitted the last one earlier this week. So in total now, we, RIDEM and the Narragansett Indian Tribe together have requested $19.5 million. And if we get, so NOAA encourages you to apply to multiple applications, and they sort of consider them as a package, is what we hear. So hopefully they consider this package, and hopefully NOAA continues their funding, and they can help us with final design, permitting, and construction of the vertical slot fishway over the lowest 2 dams. So we also are going to be presenting at the NIAFWA conference, the Northeast Association of Wildlife Agencies. I don't think I got that acronym right, but we'll be talking about this project, and we've come up with some nice kind of overviews of the benefits of that. So we'll share that with you soon too. The exciting one is to save the date and register actually for our fish parade coming up on May 18th. So Kaylee, if you can grab the link for registration, it's also on our website at blackstonecollaborative.org/events. So we'll do some fun crafts of making fish hats this year instead of fish on sticks. And we're going to be, instead of parading around the lowest 2 dams on foot, we're actually going to meet at Central Falls Landing, and we're going to kayak up to where the fish would be going at Lonsdale Marsh, which is the spawning grounds that we're looking to finally get fish to. So we'll explore the marsh, and you can either kayak on one of the Blackstone Valley Tourism Council's kayaks. You can rent one, you can bring your own, or you can reserve a seat on the 40-passenger Explorer, which is BVTC's boat. And we also will be having the award-winning drummer and singer Jeff Pegram, who had joined us last year as well, and he'll be on the Explorer, so you can hear that amazing Indigenous drumming and singing. We were able to explore the marsh yesterday just to see the conditions and what it looks like. It was a great trip. It was really neat to kind of like see all these different ins and outs and different ecosystems in the marsh. For water quality updates, Kaylee, I'll hand this to you.
Sure. So our next CSO working group meeting is May 13th from 2 to 3. If you're interested, just shoot me an email and I'm happy to add you to that list. And we had 2 CSO events in Worcester this past month. So we have 0.9 million gallons and 0.7. So they got a new sensor recently at the CSO facility, and the numbers are actually much lower than what they were saying previously. So that's good news. And yeah, as we have more updates, we'll share those with you as well.
Thank you. Access, Peter, go ahead.
Yes, just about water quality. We had our water quality summit a week ago at the Visitor Center at Quinsigamond there, the state. Professor Bill Sobczak made a great presentation. We had Representative Mary Keefe talking about the need to love this river. So that was great. We had our first, Heather's not here today, we had our first water quality session last Saturday. And thanks to our volunteers in Worcester, despite the snow and slippery roads, we got all the sites tested. So shout outs to Heather to make that happen. That's it.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah. Kaylee was at that event. Thank you, Kaylee, for representing us and talking about the work that we're doing too. It's always a good one. I don't have any access updates. I don't know if anybody else does. For dam removal and restoration, it's really linked into the grant update, so I'll go through that. But we've assisted with a bunch of different MVP grant applications, including Douglas, where they're looking to mitigate flooding at their fire station with installation of a bunch of different BMPs. Uxbridge to remove Homebrew Dam, Worcester to continue their stormwater modeling, and Northbridge to redesign a causeway, both to include some low impact development, managing stormwater, as well as improving pedestrian safety. We also are working with Ty and Bond to apply to the EEA Dam and Seawall program. So previously we'd gotten funding from the Narragansett Bay Estuary program for 60% design of removal of 2 privately owned dams in Douglas. And the Dam and Seawall program, if we receive that, would get us to 100% design and permitting for removal of those 2 dams. So we're pretty excited about that. Are there any other updates? I guess I'll just say any other updates in general that folks want to share, whether it's restoration or other topics?
Stephanie, Patty here.
Hi, Patty.
Just one quick update. The Rhode Island Natural History Survey will be conducting their BioBlitz in the Blackstone Valley this year. at Gloucester, I forget which, Steer Farm in Gloucester. We're working with the Gloucester Land Trust.
Patty, I think that's in the Woonasquatucket River watershed.
It's also in the Blackstone.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Gloucester is also in the Blackstone watershed.
I did know that, but I thought the whole preserve was in the Woonasquatucket, but I could be wrong.
Oh, that's possible, but I'm just saying it's in the Blackstone Valley. So I guess I come from a different perspective. I look at it as the valley. So, but anyway, and they have anybody's interested, they have an orientation meeting set for next Tuesday in Gloucester at the town hall. But yeah, Kate, you're right. It is part of the Woonasquatucket, but I always look at it
The
as
only reason I know is because I live 2 miles from where the BioBlitz is going to be, and I know that I'm in the Woonasquatucket River watershed. So, but yeah, if anybody's interested in natural history, it's going to be a fun time, and I'm planning on participating. So,
yeah, I've participated in the past as a writer, and I just end up writing poems and following people around and looking at things and learning new things. So anyway, just wanted to share that. And also I put in the chat, I don't know if folks have had a chance to visit the new section of the bikeway in Blackstone, Massachusetts. I know it was in the cold of winter when the ribbon cutting was held, but I've been there a few times and I'd be willing to share some photos, but it's a nice new section of the bike path that people should check out.
Yeah, connecting the 2 states. It's pretty cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Anyway, that's all I have.
Thanks. Also, thanks, Kaylee, for putting in the chat. I forgot to put a slide for this, but the Mass ECAN conference, it's the Ecosystem Climate Adaptation Network. If you're not part of it, it's an amazing network. I highly recommend signing up for their emails. They have a bunch of different working groups, and one of them is on mainstreaming nature-based solutions. And Hillary and I co-lead that one, and they've selected that topic as the topic for this year's conference. And so it's going to be on Thursday, May 1st at Clark University. It's a free registration. There's sort of a recommended donation, but if you cannot do that donation, it's no problem. You can register for free. It's going to be an all-day conference all about mainstreaming nature-based solutions. So we'll hear from a ton of different speakers from different perspectives around the state's update, what's going on, and thinking things like what are the permitting challenges, how do other states do permitting of these different kinds of restoration projects, what are some of the myths around green infrastructure and nature-based solutions, and addressing some of those, equity, workforce development. There's a little bit of everything in there, so I definitely encourage you to check it out. I also forgot to say that there's this great conservation win in Burrillville of 151 acres preserved. So congratulations to Rydam and Burrillville on that. David, hand it to you.
Just wanted to elaborate just for a second on what you had mentioned, Stephanie, about the dam removal. We did apply for an MVP action grant for the removal of a small dam in Uxbridge. And if it's successful, this will be, according to Stephanie, and I think she does her research well, the first dam removal in the Blackstone Valley in over 100 years. So that in itself is remarkable. This project is also has a significant involvement of the community. And we were partnered with Stephanie and with 2 people from the Blackstone River Watershed Association, Heather and Joanne, as well as the Uxbridge High School and the Uxbridge Senior Center. So it's going to be a project, a restoration project of wetlands, which will involve citizen scientists from student and senior populations with a big public education and school education component. And we're hoping to videograph it so it becomes like a showcase kind of a project. It's going to, if we're approved, it's going to go on over 2 years, and we'll keep you updated. So thank you to all the wonderful partners, Stephanie, Heather, and Joanne, for helping with this, and our fingers are crossed.
Yeah, and David gets super kudos. Like, I'm getting paid to do this work right now. David does not get paid. He's a volunteer. So he's what we call a local champion, making all these wonderful climate resilience things happen in Uxbridge. So
it keeps me smiling.
Yeah, and I take my data from American Rivers, who's been tracking dam removal in across the United States since 1912. And according to their research, there haven't been any dam removals in our watershed in any of that time. So I don't know when the last one was. but we're really excited to have hopefully homebrew be the first, and I'd love Douglas to be right afterwards. Thank you to Kaylee for putting this great list together. There's a lot of different cleanups happening in the watershed. So if you're interested in joining any of these, they're in our notes, but you can get links to all the different ones, or if you have questions, let us know. And then Patty put another one in the chat here. Keep Blackstone Valley Beautiful is having another cleanup on the 19th at Vernon Street. Sure. Peter, go ahead.
Yes. Actually, Ted Beauvais could probably speak to this better, but the BRWA is having their Family Fun Fishing Day. That's going to be also in May, the Saturday, I believe the 17th.
17th.
And it's also, okay, sorry. And then it's also not mine, but the Granite Park, John Marsland and BRWC are having a cleanup at a river access site there at where the three towns come together. And then just a, well, two items. One, the BRWA did a cleanup with the Millbury Environmental Council out of the high school 2 weeks ago. And on the bike path, under the turnpike, one student found $100 bill that had washed off the highway. So keep your eyes open for manna from heaven. The last update, and I'm just a little concerned about this one, in Woonsocket, Mike DeBrois, the great engineer, had resigned in a cloud last fall. He got replaced by John Pratt. When I made a phone call yesterday to see about where our check was, I find John Pratt is no longer working for the city. So I'm a little concerned with the city of Woonsocket's capacity, especially in the engineering department. I'll leave it at that.
I know I just met with the director of planning last week, I think it was, who is very focused on floodplain management right now, actually. But I don't know if he might have any information. He was a great resource and followed up with me afterwards. So we can share that contact information if you'd like. His name is John. He won't be head of engineering, but he might know what's going on.
Thank you.
Any other updates that folks want to share?
Yeah, I have a quick update. I'm working with the Friends of the Blackstone River Watershed Council to get a permit for a trash flotation collection device called a water goat. We had submitted a couple of months ago to DEM. DEM has started their review. I went out on site, and we are just answering a couple of questions that the engineer had, because the engineer clearly didn't look at the photograph that we included. And so I've been practicing my technical drawing skills. So I'm not an engineer, but I can pretend to be one on TV. But yeah, hopefully we'll get that permitted, before the weather warms up too much. I would expect maybe the end of May.
Yeah, great. Thank you for working on that. We're excited to get that goat up because we know that it catches a lot of trash, hundreds of pounds of trash every time it gets cleaned out. So there's a lot coming downriver there. When we were at Central Falls Landing yesterday, we saw piles of trash collecting at the dock at Central Falls. So there's definitely a lot of need for it.
That's too bad they couldn't put a trash rack at that Central Falls Landing in front of the dock. They used to have, when I lived in Lowell, they had a couple set up by the couple of the canals, and it was easier to clean out than the way it's set up at Central Falls Landing. But
well, if you need help permitting a trash rack there,
maybe we'll put that in our Kitticuck Restored project. That's a need we have. Or 319 plan. Yeah. Anything else that folks want to share? We went from behind schedule to ahead of schedule, so you never know how long things will take for updates. Okay. Well, I stopped sharing too soon, actually. I'm sorry. I forgot to mention that also our next meeting is May 16th, which will be right before Family Fun Fishing Day and the fish parade. So we will remind you about those things at our next meeting also. But we'd love to see you at all these really great spring events coming up. So happy Earth Month. And that was another question we could ask, maybe, is like, maybe we'll ask you that next time. You can think about it. It's like, what did you think of Earth Month? Did you do anything fun for that? Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you again to our amazing presenters and sharing all of your information on floodplain management. We hope that you learned something new and came away with a lot of new resources. We'll share them all with you in our notes, and we'll see you next time on May 16th. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Steph.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.